Hi, my name is Ariana Scalfo. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, post-exertional malaise, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, and celiac disease. I've spent my entire life fighting the push-crash cycle, and even before I knew what it was or understood how much it affected my life, I experienced it. This time around, I'm going to engage in the cycle on purpose. So before it was happening to me, and this time I'm going to happen to it. I'm going to be a willing guinea pig, and I'm going to track all of my biomarkers, things like brain fog, cognition, emotional and mental well-being, all the way throughout my training and pushing to the crash. And I'm going to see how many times I crash in between here and my end goal. Welcome to Project Push Crash. What is the project? The project is me. I will be training over the course of 7 to 8 months to hike the Southern California Triple Crown, which is 3 mountains, in under 72 hours. It should be about 50 miles and over 20,000 feet of gain. I will be working with Superform in LA. They're going to be running VO2 max testing, force plate testing, all kinds of testing on me at about 3 month intervals throughout to track my performance increases. And I will also be gathering a ton of data on my own. I will be using my Visible Watch and app, my Garmin watch, video diaries, and routine assessments, self-assessments that I'm going to be running on myself to measure my well-being, changes in my health status, whether or not I'm in a crash, and just kind of monitoring how much of a dumpster fire I become over the next 7 to 8 months. My goal with the project itself will culminate in this 72-hour Triple Crown adventure. It is not so that I can do it the fastest. I'm not going to be aiming to complete it in anything impressive, not at all. I'm just going to be trying to get all three done in under 72 hours. The goal being I want to do so much work and effort that I push myself into a crash, knowing that my crash will get worse each consecutive day. So day one, I'll probably be feeling fine. Day two, I will feel worse. Day three, I will feel god awful. And then my goal is to track how long my crash lasts. So in doing this across 3 days, I give myself the opportunity to track how my body changes and how much harder it is for me to manage exertion as the days of exertion pile up, which is something that basically happens in post-exertional malaise in a small scale with everyday tasks for me as well. I'm just going to do it on a very grand scale because why not? I'm purposefully going to be pushing myself into a crash, and crashes suck, especially when they're from something as big, as much exertion as climbing 3 mountains in 3 days, right? It's going to be awful. So I want to have fun doing it, and I really like being outside. I love Southern California. I love all three of these mountains. So I figured, why not push myself into this crash doing something that I love? You might be wondering why and why me? I have been coaching in the nutrition and fitness space for almost a decade now, and I now serve as the director of coaching for Complete Human Performance. And I love training people and I love fitness. I know that my background in education now in training people and doing things like running assessments and even auto-regulating my own training, I'm going to bring with me a bunch of knowledge from the training and performance side that I don't think is often meshed with the chronic illness side. It's not often that the two sides truly make friends. In around 2020 to 2022, I was about 4 to 5 years into my serious fitness journey. I managed to bring my powerlifting total up to over 900 pounds, which would have been elite level. I never competed because chronic illness, but I do have plenty of evidence of me hitting those lifts. I was also simultaneously running up and down mountains in Southern California when I lived in San Diego. I was able to set several fastest times, not on the fastest known times website, but rather on Strava's segment system. You can look it up. I think I may have been replaced on a couple, but I know that there is a Iron Mountain Loop in Southern California and Mount Gower. I think I'm second now. But I wasn't slow, right? Like I was running up and down mountains fast enough that in such a hugely competitive outdoor trail running space like San Diego, I was regularly in the top 10. So my mile time at that time was around 6 minutes, but I never directly trained it. Hate mile time. I will never do it. Don't ask me to. And my half marathon was around 2 hours on trail, and no trail in Southern California is flat. So assume that had over 1,000 feet of gain in it. But anyway, I was fit. I was really fit. I also managed to complete Cactus to Clouds, which is one of the mountains that I will be doing in the Triple Crown. I just did the Up solo in 2019. That's 8 miles and over 8,000 feet of elevation gain. I had a blast. I also won an 11-mile trail race in that particular race. I also had a stress fracture at the time. I do not recommend doing that. All this to say, I'm no stranger to high performance. I am no stranger to discomfort. I have done this before. In about the middle of 2021, I contracted COVID. Yay! And during the COVID shutdowns, I experienced a really big uptick in my mast cell symptoms and my POTS symptoms. I had insane fatigue. I had an increase in food allergies. Even though I have celiac disease, I was occasionally allergic to cinnamon. Right now, I'm allergic to chocolate for some reason. And the herb thyme. So, ton of GI issues, and I started getting exercise-induced asthma. I've never had that in my life. After COVID, all the time. Despite having exercise-induced asthma and all of these COVID symptoms and long COVID, which essentially is MCAS, POTS, chronic fatigue syndrome, and post-exertional malaise, right? I competed in the Spartan Games during the Spartan Games. It was a 4-day multi-event hybrid competition. I put hybrid in quotation marks because it was a lot of endurance. Even though I was fit enough on paper to participate in each of the events, as the days wore on, I found that every day after the first day, I felt so much worse. My performance got absolutely clobbered. I almost passed out during the half marathon, and it wasn't because of hydration or fueling. I ate and I drank water while I was out there. I looked like death. I felt like death, and I was performing like death. And as the days wore on, I started to develop severe cramping in my biceps and in my quads. And even though I had done, 4 days of intense training before in a week, I'd never done them back to back. And I realize now with hindsight, I was always really good at auto-regulating, but being forced to compete and perform at my top level for 4 days in a row absolutely obliterated me. And I was crushed emotionally, mentally, all of it. I was so disappointed. I did not have my chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis at the time. Was so disappointed. I could not figure out why I broke that way. And even after I returned home, I remained sick for months afterward. It took me a very long time to recover completely. And because of the emotional damage of realizing that I couldn't do that, even though I had so much fun, I had such a great time, I made so many great friends, there was just this underlying suspicion in the back of my head where I was like, I don't think that could have gone any different. I did everything I could to take care of myself, and it went terrible. And there was this kind of like, I think I'm more sick than I'm acknowledging. So I just ignored it. I bottled it up and I pretended it didn't happen. But it happened again after I had my son. I trained myself up. Now, I wasn't nearly as fit for this as I was for the Spartan Games, especially not cardiovascularly. But I trained myself up pretty well, gosh darn it. It happened again at the Hybricon Games in 2024. As each day progressed, I felt sicker and sicker and sicker, but also this like foggy, my face was fuzzy. I couldn't move. I felt like there was someone sitting on my chest. I was just like, why is this happening? Like, I even took it easy. I didn't compete as hard as the last time. I just completely bombed a run I should have performed really well in. I was fit enough to perform really well, and I didn't. And again, it just really crushed me. And finally, I was like, all right, I can't. So I went and saw my doctor, and that is what led to my formal diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome and post-exertional malaise, which I now realize that I have had my entire life. I really only acknowledged it, faced it, and accepted it after the Hybricon Games because I, again, was faced with the reality that multi-day competitions are just not in the cards for me, no matter how fun I think they are, no matter how fit I am, I can't do them. And that was crushing, to be honest. Super bummed me out. But after my diagnosis, my doctor offered me a bunch of protocols for people with post-exertional malaise. And they were like the CHOP protocol, very gentle return to exercise programs for like heart failure patients. In training for the Hybricon Games, I ran up and down Table Rock here in Boise 3 times in a row in under 2 hours. I accumulated almost 2,500 feet of elevation gain in about 8 miles of up and down. And then I won a strongman competition in the novice like a few months later. So to be handed a protocol that was so basic, I just felt this like massive disconnect. She was telling me things like, I don't think you'll ever perform that way again. In my brain, I'm like, I just did. I can't do it 4 days in a row, but I can train, can't I? And I was so confused and so upset. And she was very validating, very kind, very polite, but I just felt this giant chasm opening up between my lived experience as someone who's been an athlete and the expectations of what I should be able to experience as a chronically ill person. And I was like, what do I do to fill this empty space here? Postpartum itself for me was a prolonged crash. I had a ton of mast cell flares. I started getting out of my face. Obviously, I wasn't sleeping. My son had colic. I would get like 4 hours of sleep a night broken into 2 hour chunks here and there. I had postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. We moved 3 times in 3 years. And my old method of dealing with things, which was literally just laying down and dying until it got better, it wasn't an option anymore. You can kind of do that with a newborn, maybe, but as soon as he started to scoot and walk and he became a toddler, it's impossible. So around the time he turned 1, I just stopped exercising entirely. I was like, I'm going to recover from this. And I'm also going to take long enough away from exercise that when I come back, my head is screwed on straight and I can do this right from the very beginning. I'm not going to be operating off of old expectations. I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to feel spiteful. And I need to find new fuel because my fuel before was this kind of like excitement for pushing the barriers, pushing the envelope, figuring out what I was capable of, even if I exploded. Failure doesn't bother me. But like now it's like I can't get sick. So what does that leave me? I need a new purpose. So here I am. Project Push Crash for me is a way of me re-entering the world of performance exercise, not just staying healthy. I do want to obtain some performance related goals as I move through this, but I want to try and navigate this with as infrequent and as few crashes as are physically possible to avoid for me, which might be harder than I think. But I'd also like to capture the difference between a healthy individual and someone with post-exertional malaise. Does the intensity of the exercise matter? If I'm constantly staying sub-threshold or keeping the duration of my threshold intervals under a certain ceiling, if I'm keeping my blood lactate under a certain amount, can I avoid crashy type symptoms? Can I avoid the curtailed performance that comes with post-exertional malaise? Even if I'm not in a crash the following day, I don't have access to top end power. I don't have access to top end speed. And this may continue for up to 72 hours until my whole system recovers, or it can continue for weeks if I've done, way, way, way too much, which I fully intend on doing. But this is the goal of the exercise, right? Is to, in experimenting and in finding out what works for me and what worked for me in the past that I didn't realize was working, and now I can match my data to my lived subjective experience. It's also to fill again that chasm that I felt between myself, someone who's like, I was deadlifting 300 pounds while pregnant, and I hiked a mountain in Switzerland at 7 months pregnant with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, with all these issues, to my providers who look at my sheet, my chart, and all they see is a person who has these conditions. I'm not alone. I know there are other athletes who got COVID and now have long COVID, who have mast cell, who have post-exertional malaise, and they're coming from such a high level of fitness that, like, yeah, it's really disappointing for them to have their performance curtailed like this. It's emotionally devastating, can confirm, and it's even more devastating to be told by a doctor that you will never be able to achieve those things that you used to achieve before again. It hurts. And I want to see what I can offer the field and what I can offer other athletes as alternatives, obviously guided by their physician, guided by their doctors, But I want to provide alternatives. I want to provide new ideas, and I want to provide new data. So that way, when someone who is a well-established athlete comes into the doctor's office and is diagnosed with any of these conditions, instead of being handed the CHOP protocol, the doctor can say, hey, here's this specialist, not me. Hopefully this will just give another doctor more ammunition to use, right? Here's this specialist. They have all of these assessments we can do to figure out what causes your crashes, how much exercise can you tolerate. I have to believe that adaptation as a sick person is possible, because it is possible. I did it. I just have to figure out how to do it in a healthy way and crash less and emphasize my quality of life more now that my values have shifted as a new mother and as an adult who doesn't want to spend her whole life tired. So yeah, welcome to Push Crash. Get ready to watch me blow up.